Baby Audio have just released Smooth Operator Pro, but I've been lucky enough to have it for a few days already to try it out for you guys. Here's what I found. Smooth Operator Pro is a harmonic signal balancer which uses resonance suppression and spectral dynamics, and that is an awful lot of words which you possibly don't really understand. So let me explain how I think of this plugin. I kind of think of it as a multi-band compressor with many different bands. So it's working in a lot of detail, and each of those bands has been placed in response to the characteristics of the material that you're using it with. Now the goal here is to reduce harshness, reduce muddiness, and it can also help with masking as well. And it was with those three goals in mind that I applied it to an old demo I dug up from about 4 years ago. Now before we get into how I used it with my demo, I think we need to quickly take a look at how this new Pro version compares to the previous version. The original Smooth Operator was quite a straightforward affair. We would adjust our threshold just like on a compressor to a point where some of the signal was going above it and some processing occurs. Now how much detail that processing was occurring in, or how many points of processing we had, was controlled with this focus control. So as I increase that, you can see it's happening in a lot more detail now. And then we can actually adjust this threshold on a sort of a frequency basis. So we can use one of these 4 nodes and drag them around so that we can include or exclude certain frequencies from the processing. So to this degree, we had some customization, but the new Pro version takes customization to a completely different level. So again, I'll adjust my threshold like so. So we've got some processing occurring, and then we've got this panel on the left-hand side where we can, for example, in the basic setup, exclude some of the low and high frequencies from being processed. Or if we go into the focus panel here, we can control the detail in a couple of different ways. We've also now got actual control over the compression, so we can adjust how much compression with the ratio and the speed of it with the attack and release controls. We've got imaging controls, so we can process in stereo or do mid-side processing. We've got some sidechain controls, and I'll be doing a lot of that in the demo in just a moment. And we've got an output control, so we can blend our original signal with our process signal. But where it gets really interesting is the fact that we can add nodes to our heart's content here. I'm not actually sure what the limit is, if there is any limit, but it's more than you're probably going to need. So we can add our own nodes to adjust this threshold line like so. But where it gets super interesting is that if we select one of these nodes, we can actually override some of the global settings that we set up on the left hand side with its own custom settings. So for example, with this center node selected here, I can go down to the bottom and open up its compression channel and then override the global settings to adjust the ratio, attack and release, for example. The same is true with the focus and the imaging control. So lots and lots of control over what we're doing here. So I guess you want to know how it actually affects the sound and how the sound of my demo in particular was affected. Before we do that, and I promise we will, I just want to mention that I do have a coupon code so that you can get 10% off of this plugin. In fact, all of the plugins with Baby Audio. Just follow the link in the description down below for that, and I'll put the code down there. The initial launch price of this, by the way, is $79. So that's you're going to take $7.99 off. I'll let you do the math on that. So it's a great price. So how does it sound? So I started off by using this plugin in a really simple, straightforward way to control the low end of an acoustic guitar, which was getting a bit boomy at times. Let's have a listen to a before and after of me applying my settings. So it's controlling that low end, stopping it from getting too boomy, but it's doing it in a much more dynamic way than a static EQ would, and it's doing it in a more detailed way than just a simple multi-band compressor would. It's focusing in on those frequencies which really need to be suppressed at that time. And I use a very simple curve here. I did lower it here, the threshold that is, with these very low frequencies, just to make sure I captured and processed those sort of sub frequencies, if you like. And then I simply went ahead, I used the compression controls just to make sure that I was really pumping it here with a highish ratio. I had a quick attack to make sure it was responding fairly quickly, but I really didn't use many other controls. Now, if I move on a little bit further in my demo and I keep this in solo, you're going to hear something really strange occur. Have a listen. So you can hear there, suddenly the low end almost entirely disappeared. And it sounds a little bit weird because you were listening in solo. What was actually happening was I was using the sidechain feature. So I had another instance of Smooth Operator applied to the guitar, and I was sending the signal of the bass guitar, which comes in at that point. And that signal was now being used to control those low frequencies. And the reason it sounded really weird to you was because you couldn't hear the bass guitar. So have a listen now with the bass guitar coming in. And this really helps to reduce a lot of muddiness that would occur when you've got two instruments together, occupying that frequency space. Let me play the bass guitar and guitar at the same time again, but this time I'll just switch off that sidechain and you'll hear how very sort of muddy it sounds. So that's why I was using the sidechain feature there. So that all kind of happens automatically. Again, a pretty simple curve. Again, I was trying to make sure I capture those super low frequencies. I had the detail up pretty high. That controls kind of how many points of processing is actually happening. And I had the isolation up pretty high. So with the isolation on this, when you have it low, then it's affecting frequencies either side of your kind of control points, as it were, or processing points. But when you have the isolation up high, then it only affects those kind of frequencies. And that's what I wanted it to do there. I wanted it to focus in on the frequencies where the bass guitar and the acoustic were colliding there. So you're going to see side chaining come up a fair amount actually in the other demos that I'm going to show you. But I think now we should move on to the vocals. So I was actually quite keen to use this as a de-esser for my vocals, and I'm pretty pleased with the results, and it was easier to set up. I simply did a little dip in my threshold at around about 5K or so, and then I wanted to exclude any lower frequencies, so I used that low preservation filter to do that. Then I chose a part of my song where there was a couple of S's, and I'm going to let you listen to it before processing first of all.
I hope you smile along the way, and how is that?
So there's that S sound, and then there's a sort of a slight high whistle in there as well, which I wanted to suppress. So let's turn the processing on and have a listen.
I hope you smile along the way, and how is that?
So I was pretty pleased with the results there. And by the way, with my compression settings, I did just make sure I had the attack pretty fast. So it was really clamping down on that sibilance very, very quickly. Now, another way in which I processed the vocals, well, sort of the vocals, was using side chaining again. I'm going to go across to another instance of the plugin, but this time it's applied to a bus which has got all of my backing instruments, etc. on it, everything except for the vocals. and I use the vocals as the sidechain input for the Smooth Operator Pro in this instance. So the idea here is to suppress the backing while the vocalist is singing, but only with the specific frequencies that she's using. So let's go ahead to a much busier part of the song, and you'll see and hear that happening, and it helps to keep the vocal on top.
I took my soul through the darkest hole to travel back to understand.
So it's very useful in that way, I find, for just keeping, you know, as I say, the vocal on top of that mix. But unlike a multi-band compressor or a broadband compressor where it would be compressing all of the frequencies, it's focusing on the frequencies that vocal is using. So one major source of both mud and harshness can be reverb, and I wanted this really huge reverb with a nice long tail on my vocal. Before I did any processing, it was sounding like this.
I took my soul through the darkest hole too.
Okay, so cavernous, right? But that would play havoc with the rest of the mix. All that low end in the reverb would make it sound just so mushy. And then we've got this potential of this kind of shrillness with some of the sibilants especially. So I processed this in 2 stages with this plugin. With the first instance, I created this curve, which was basically cutting out a lot of the low end when it was present, and then also taking care of some of that high end shrillness. Again, this works in detail with specific frequencies, and with that I got this result.
I took my soul through the darkest hole too.
So quite a big improvement already, and I kind of could have left it there, but I also decided to use the vocal for some sidechain compression of the reverb. So a very simple setup. I just had my threshold going across all the way flat like that, and then I used the actual vocal as the input for the sidechain. So every time she was singing, the reverb gets suppressed, but when she stops singing, we hear it again. So we get to hear that tail. So the end result of both of these was this.
I took my soul through the darkest hole too.
So we get that lovely tail there, but we don't get that muddiness and that harshness. Let me know in the comments down below if I'm reading your mind right now. Let me guess, you want to know if this can be used on the master bus. Am I right? Well, the answer is yes, it can, but I've definitely found that less is more. I've set up this curve here for the threshold, which is basically designed to make sure that the full frequency range is being processed at some point. But if you go too far, it can sound pretty yuck. Let's do a before and after and see how it, in my opinion, kind of opens up the mix.
I took my soul through the darkest hole to travel back to understand. I live in Wonderland.
Please don't be shy. Let me know in the comments down below how you feel about this plugin now that you've seen it demoed. And if you do decide to go ahead and buy it, don't forget to make use of the coupon. The details of that are in the description down below. I want to finish off by letting you hear the demo all the way through. But before I do, I just want to thank you for watching today. I'm Mike. I hope you're well, and I'll see you in the next video.
Mother, how are you today? I hope you smile along the way. And how is Dad? I hope he's doing okay. You're probably wondering where I've been, what kind of trouble I've been in. Well, rest your weary heart, Mom. Oh, where do I begin? I took my soul